Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Kai Jackson. I am the anchor for WBFF Fox 45 in Baltimore, and I'm your master of ceremonies tonight for this evening. And we would, again, like to get started now, so we're going to ask that everyone takes their seats. I extend you a warm welcome to the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights Gala celebration to honor the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Fair Housing Act of 1968. A lot happened in 1968 in our country, did it not? And 90 years of the Commission combating discrimination throughout the state of Maryland. It is awesome to be here at the great Reginald F. Lewis Museum to celebrate those two milestone events, the journey for equity, opportunity, and inclusion for all people. Show of hands, who's been here to the Lewis Museum in the past? I'm sure many of you have. It's a great, wonderful venue. They're really expanding, trying to do a lot of great things, so I encourage you to come out here and take advantage of it and to support this wonderful facility here in our city. It has a lot to offer. But I'm also certain that it's not lost on any of you here today that the nation is different than the nation was 50 years ago in 1968, or than it was 90 years ago in 1928. The differences are obvious, but it's also obvious that we as a nation aren't quite where we need to be in the year 2018 as it relates to race, intergroup relations, equity, and opportunity for all. So while we are here to celebrate tonight, we're also here to commit to working more diligently to continue to craft a way forward that will uplift those who are vulnerable and make straight the road for those who have been historically denied access and opportunity. We have an ambitious program for you tonight, and we hope you enjoy it. So let's begin by introducing our head table guests, if you will. Chairperson of the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights, Shawn Wright, to my far left. Dr. Ben Carson, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Who I know feels right at home here in Baltimore. He spent a great deal of his professional life here, as you all know. To my right, the Executive Director of the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights and my longtime friend, Alvin Gilliard. Our keynote speaker for the evening is noted political commentator, attorney, and former South Carolina State Legislator Bakari Sellers. Rounding out our table tonight will be the Honorable Mayor Catherine Pugh, who is not here at the moment, but she will be here, and when she is, I'll bring the mayor up for some comments. In the meantime, let's move forward. Before we hear from the chairperson of the commission, we'd like to introduce the hardworking, committed members who make up the Board of Commissioners for the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights, and they are seated throughout this room right now. Commissioners, will you please stand or wave your hand? It's your choice as your name is called. Please welcome Commissioner Dr. Gina McKnight-Smith. Vice Chair Gary Norman. Commissioner and longtime friend of mine and confidant at times when I need him or he needs me, an attorney, Roberto Allen. Roberto. And this is a tandem thing tonight. Roberto, along with Alvin, are responsible for me being here tonight. They both kind of made calls and told me I didn't have a choice. Commissioner Hayden Duke, would you please stand? Commissioner Duke, or wave your hand. Thank you. And co-chair of tonight's gala, Commissioner Dominique Moore. Let's give them all a hand. Now to bring us the occasion for our event tonight, please welcome the chairperson of the commission, Shawn Wright. Shawn.
Good evening.
Good evening.
What a wonderful event in a wonderful place. The lights are kind of bright, so if I'm squinting, it's because of the lights, but you all look wonderful tonight. So, Secretary Carson and distinguished guests, good evening and welcome to this inaugural gala event, honoring and celebrating 50 years since the passage, thank you, of Title VIII of the 1968 Civil Rights Act, also known as the Fair Housing Act, and 90 years of the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. As chair of the commission, it is my pleasure to welcome you and to thank you for joining us this evening at the historic Reginald Lewis Museum of African American History. Across the country, Americans are celebrating this 50-year milestone of the Fair Housing Act. Celebrations from the Fair Housing Summit in Los Angeles to similar gala events in Detroit, Atlanta, and New York. This country recognizes this momentous occasion and embraces the history of fair housing in this country, while we're still recognizing the current challenges that we faced. As President Lyndon Baines Johnson stated on the occasion of signing the Fair Housing Act into law, the roots of injustice run deep, but the voice of justice speaks again. And this act and other laws that follow in every state in this country continue to ensure open access to housing for every American, regardless of race, color, religion, gender, familial status, national origin, marital status, sexual orientation, and gender identity. So tonight, we celebrate President Johnson's courage, Martin Luther King Jr.'s wisdom, diligence, and dream, Marion Williams' tenacity to be the first person to file a housing discrimination complaint in the U.S., and countless others who endured being denied what our kids are growing up to expect: the fundamental right that every person has the opportunity to rent, purchase, and live wherever they so choose. From the Eastern Shore to Baltimore City, fair housing opportunities are a part of the American dream. The Maryland Commission on Civil Rights and its 90-year history continues to embrace its vision of having a state that is free from any trace of discrimination, whether in employment, housing, or public accommodations. The men and women of this agency work tirelessly to ensure that that vision remains the forefront of our minds. Could I have the men and women of the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights please stand and be recognized? So clearly they're all working the room to make it. So we want to thank them. So if you see them throughout the evening, thank them for their tireless efforts. So as we gather this evening, let's embrace our past. Let's work together to forge a more perfect union. Thank you and enjoy the evening.
Commissioner, thank you very much. We appreciate those remarks, Commissioner Wright. We are here to celebrate the 50th anniversary, as the Commissioner mentioned, of the signing of the Fair Housing Act of 1968. The Secretary of Housing and Urban Development at that time was the Honorable Robert Weaver. The Maryland Commission on Civil Rights, after taking the necessary steps to become substantially equivalent, became an official partner with HUD in 1996. Please join me in welcoming tonight the current Secretary of HUD, Baltimore's adopted son, the Honorable Dr. Ben Carson.
Well, thank you. It's good to be back in Baltimore again. Started out today in Florida, and it was beautiful there, but the only thing that made it worth leaving was coming back here, and particularly for an occasion like this. Thank you, Kai, for your kind introduction. And it's a pleasure to be with you on behalf of HUD and to welcome you to this remarkable gathering hosted by our partner, the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. I want to thank the mayor, who will be here soon, for all she's doing for this magnificent city, and also Chairman Sean Wright for leadership throughout the state of Maryland. The Commission has participated in HUD's Fair Housing Assistance Program since 1994, and we appreciate your commitment to ensuring safe, decent, and fair housing, free from bias, discrimination, and prejudice. Critical to this effort are the many educational outreaches by the Commission that they take to make sure that people really understand what fair housing is all about. Tonight, we celebrate the golden anniversary of the Fair Housing Act and another enormous milestone, 90 years of service by the Commission. The spirit of liberty, equality, and justice led so many Americans to understand that our nation's promises had been long left unfulfilled. That call to action compels every well-meaning person to continue to march as we strive to live out the true meaning of our nation's creed, that all men and women are created equal. The Fair Housing Act prohibited discrimination in the sales, renting, and financing of housing. The Act created HUD's Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, which continues to work with our partners to carry out fairness and freedom for all people today. Fair housing is more than a symbolic gesture along the long road to justice. Fair housing is an essential element to our freedom and the foundation for so many of our families and our children to flourish in. Housing can really be a safe haven from the unfairness that people experience throughout their lives, which is one of the reasons that it's so important. You know, I remember as a child when my parents got divorced, for a short while being homeless until relatives took us in another state, and how difficult a period of time that was. And then subsequently, I remember as an 8th grader feeling that I was being treated unfairly. And yet the housing played an important role, that shelter, that comfort that my mother gave me. You know, in the 8th grade, I was the only black student in the class. And at the end of the semester, they would give an academic award to the one with the highest achievement. And you take your report card around to each of the teachers, and they would grade it, and I had all A's. And I came to the last one, and it was band. And I was really good in band. I subsequently got a scholarship to Interlock, and those in music know what that means. But the band teacher gave me a C, because he said, this is an opportunity to make sure he doesn't get that award. But to his chagrin, band didn't count. So, so I actually got the award, and that told me there is a God. But, you know, after the victories of 1964 and 1965, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. recognized there are still major civil rights battles to be won, critical barriers that needed to be traversed before Americans could claim their birthright of that freedom. And I'm delighted to be here tonight, as fair housing is central to our mission at HUD, and because Baltimore occupies a special place in my heart. Candy and I came to Baltimore in 1997, and she was devastated that she couldn't be here, by the way, but she's speaking in 3 states this weekend. She's more popular than I am. But, we came in 1997 from the smaller town of Ann Arbor, when unknown to us, we were about to embark upon a leg of our journey that would change our lives forever. I began my internship that year at Johns Hopkins under the direction of a great man, Dr. George Udvarhai, the head of the neurosurgery residency program. Candy moved with me, taking various jobs before becoming an editor of a Johns Hopkins scientific publication and an MBA student. I continued on with my residency from 1978 to 83, and after a year-long stint as the senior registrar at the major teaching hospital in Western Australia, I returned to Baltimore, and an opening occurred for the director of pediatric neurosurgery. And the powers that be said, Carson's very young, but he's had all this experience in Australia. So I became the director of pediatric neurosurgery, much to my surprise and everybody else. But, interestingly enough, pediatric neurosurgery at Hopkins was not on the map nationally at that point. But because we had just tremendous people supporting me, by 2008, U.S. News and World Report ranked us #1 in the country. But Baltimore has subsequently became the center of the universe for me. But despite my position and successes, I do remember bumps along the way. Discrimination. First time I walked onto the floor as an intern, a nurse thought I was an orderly coming to transport a patient. On many occasions, it was assumed that I was someone else until they saw my badge and eventually got to know me. There were a lot of families who were surprised when their case was handed to me, possibly because I was relatively young, possibly because I was black. But none of that ever bothered me, frankly, for I knew something they didn't know. I knew about the countless hours I had toiled to become the surgeon I was. I knew my craft and had gained enormous confidence in my skills. And I believed I was given a gift by God to share with others. I would learn later from the chairman of the department, Dr. Don Long, that when many patients arrived at Hopkins and learned that they would have a black brain surgeon operating on them, they said they wouldn't allow it. And Dr. Long would tell them, there's the door. And to my knowledge, none of them ever walked out. And there were a lot of interesting occasions in clinic. I remember I was explaining to one family what we're going to do to their little child. And the grandmother said to me, "Doctor, have you ever done this operation before?" And I looked at her and I said, "No, but I'm going to take the book with me to the operating room." And that broke the ice. And she said, "Oh, well, of course, that's a silly question." But sometimes obvious rednecks would come in. And, you could see the wheels churning. And they would say, "This guy's young, and he's black, and he's chief of pediatric neurosurgery at Hopkins. He must be really good." But some of the black patients would come in, and they would say, "This guy's young, and he's black, and he's chief of pediatric neurosurgery at Hopkins? Ain't nothing, no affirmative action, operate on me." But, it didn't take long before that changed. And the truth is, I was very fortunate. I knew who I was. I could also hear the voice of my mother, who would shrug off simple prejudice and misunderstanding with a simple lesson. She would say, "People are ignorant, and you just have to educate them." And that's why the work that you do each day to educate people about issues relative to fair housing and discrimination is so vitally important. And it's important to ask why. Why are these things happening, and what can we do about them if we're willing to work together? And people sometimes say to me, "Why, after a medical career, would you go into government?" Sometimes I ask myself that too, but I'll tell you why. As a pediatric neurosurgeon, I would spend hours, sometimes operating all night to try to save a young child. And most of the times we were successful, only to have to send them back into a horrible environment in many cases with rats and roaches and lead and mold. And sometimes I would order extra tests just to make sure they could stay in the hospital an extra day or two. Don't tell anybody. But, you know, the fact of the matter is, now there's an opportunity to complete the circle and to actually do something about that environment. And tonight, we celebrate and honor you. Thank you for being here and joining us for this momentous occasion, the 50th anniversary of one of the most important acts that was ever enacted in our country, the Fair Housing Act. Thank you.
Dr. Carson, thank you for that personal testimony. I feel privileged to have had the honor to have met your mother, and I know we mourn that she passed away not long ago. She was a remarkable woman, very unassuming that I remember, but what a beautiful testimony, and thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you. Well, over the years, I think we all have watched Baltimore blossom, if not explode in some ways, especially in the areas of arts and entertainment, to the point where Baltimore actually is now recognized as a hotbed for new cutting-edge artists and performers, let alone filmmaking. We all know that this is a place Hollywood tends to love because of the wonderful architecture and aesthetic that is Baltimore. But we have a special treat for you tonight, someone who I had the privilege of meeting a few months ago at a similar event. Please join me in welcoming tonight our spoken word artist and activist for the evening, Lady Breon. Lady Breon. You are in for a treat. I'm going to assume you want the mic in your hands, am I right?
Oh, no.
No, you want it on the podium? Okay, sure.
Thank you so
Pleasure
much.
seeing you. Absolutely. Greetings,
everyone. How are you? Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure and honor. As was already stated, not only am I a poet, but I'm also an activist and organizer. So I don't typically find myself in spaces like this. So what I'm gonna ask is, I know everybody's all dressed up and, you know, comfortable in your seats, but as a spoken word artist, I'm not used to audiences just being super quiet and listening. So I'm gonna perform 2 poems, but I'm gonna ask that if you hear something you like, feel free and open to give some affirmation. And it's a couple ways you can do that, right? You can snap your fingers. If you hear something you like, try it. Okay, all right. One of the things we like to do in Baltimore, we make that good digestion sound, like you just had the best meal of your life. So if you hear something that feeds your soul, you can say, try it. All right, so I don't have to teach y'all got it. All right, so feel free. I love affirmation. It lets me know that I'm doing an okay job. So when I was thinking about what poem or poems that I could perform today, I thought about a poem called Reciprocity, and it was actually a poem that I originally wrote to myself because I felt like there were so many times I was asked to do things that I didn't feel like I was the right person, that I was worthy enough to be doing this task, that I had the skills or the know-how. And when thinking about what is being commemorated tonight, I think about all the people who may have been in that same position, how difficult it may have been to be a part of anti-discrimination work, to fight for something that other people were not willing to fight for, and how many people might have been standing in their way, and all the times they had to look at themselves and say, I'm the right person to do this, I'm going to push through, I'm going to make it happen. And so I wanted to do, oh, somebody's snapping already, all right. So I wanted to start with that poem again. It's entitled Reciprocity. Reciprocity is like the bright of the sun, coalescing with the cool of the moon, creating a whirl of solar lunar eclipses of balance. But in this cosmic cavern, my unifying compass is cracked, catapulting me into the gaping holes in the blackened lows of tarnished self-esteem, a black hole, strong enough to suck in my ideas and dreams till all vitality is non-existent, deep enough to swallow God's light and reflect nothing. Too many times I threw in the towel at the mirror, giving up on myself. Couldn't see the promise that the world had projected onto me. Felt like God had wasted good talent when he poured it onto me because I couldn't hang in the big leagues. Striking out before the first pitch, dismissed myself before a more positive school of thought could get started, barely parted my lips before I muffled my voice with doubt. Hardly a spark before I ran to put the flame out, wallowing in self-inflicted wounds of pity. Never would have imagined this arduous obstacle course prohibiting me was a mental maze, crafted from the sticks and stones of old adages, affixed with words that hurt more than any disease, cause it's dis-ease cognitively when your wants seem to exceed the limits of your perceived self-worth. See, you gotta give confidence if success you wanna receive. I got all the gifts in the world, but where is my belief? Done wrote about 100 poems, barely got 1 CD, so I decided to write a poem to the scared parts of me, to this scarred ego, beaten down into a timid tremble, for this tongue tying itself in knots in fear of being influential, for these brown ears unwilling to hear compliments claiming to be humble. My mind envisions perpetually, but my hands refuse to manifest my destiny. Limp legs, too afraid to leap because failure is where I might land. So here I stand in this mediocre purgatory, not trying, not succeeding, not living, just being. What's the point in having a passion if we're too afraid to go after it? We watch untalented people thrive every day because they got drive no matter how inefficient. As we sit complaining about our lackluster lives because to fear, we've become submissive. You gotta give yourself permission now, run. Forrest Gump style into a horizon of promise, propped up on the moonlight of your past. Gotta work at it every day if success is a habit you want to last. Scraping away wooden dismay till a carved caricature materializes. Oh, you don't believe? Well, lie to your mind's eye till you can see the truth of your excellence. See, there's a criminal in my psyche, but who's to blame when I'm the culprit? So today, I decided to dungeon my doubts, incarcerate my insecurities, place my inhibitions behind lock and key, because the only one standing in my way is me. But I might fail, but starting is the only way I'll see. There are enough haters in the world, so I'ma subtract my 32 teeth from the chatter. Can't be proud of life if what I did doesn't matter. Today I place my artistry in a box of alabaster, sacredly secluded from this dilemma, erupting in the depth of my soul where my moon is shying away from the radiant light of my sun as I sit in sky awaiting them to eclipse as one. That's that poem. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, I have one more poem. It's a little shorter. This poem is interesting because it is a poem that I wrote to encourage Black folks to appreciate and love themselves and everything that comes with being Black. And I think too often in this world that feels so anti-Black, where racism is still so prevalent, that Black folks find it difficult to love ourselves on a day-to-day basis, every second, every hour of every day. And so this poem is called I Talk Black. And the emphasis behind the poem is, again, just loving who we are, specifically from a linguistic perspective. So that's this poem. And before I do this poem, I just want to say, people always ask me, how can you get some more of my work? So I brought some product, and if you're interested in taking some with you, you know, I'm sitting in the back of the room. I'm a full-time artist, you know, I had to say that. Okay. Here we go. I have been folding my tongue beneath itself, bleaching my language, clenching my jaw with shackled teeth, because the moment I open my mouth, uprising spring from my saliva, my dialogue is sullied. Trampled with the muddy boots of trade and migration, battling nations in my diaphragm, so the rhythm in my diction sounds like a war cry. And despite the white stuffed down my windpipe, I talk black with nappy phonics, syllables that kink and twist, naughty expression that beads on my palate, so glow in this spit shine flow, Jerry curl jargon, bongo drums in my diction. This slang is semantic resistance, off with the head of the king's English. Can't you smell the riot on my breath? Char in my esophagus, my laugh is arsenic. And ain't enough opiates in this elementary education to hook me on phonics or gentrify the djembe out of my pronunciation. Love the taste of this cornbread accent. Sugar cane slang, my tongue is motherland, mama of civilization, birth of every nation, scat, boom, bat, hi-hat, jazz sax. There is music in my melanin, and I be talking super black. With a neck roll to articulate my tone, conversations get you high as my cheekbones, and lingo about lush as these hips done grown, thick thighs and deep fried vernacular, hand motions and sound effects, hieroglyphics hidden in my messages. My breath is the building of the pyramids on repeat. I'm like a Negro spiritual sampled over a trap beat. There is a black anthem inside my belly, so I will always lift every voice and speak. Thank y'all so much.
Lady Breon. Thank you, my sister. To the audience, I have 3 words. I told you. She's amazing, powerful, relevant to today. Trying to figure out, all of us, what is black, what is being too black. I don't think there's a singular definition. I think it's something that's inside of each and every one of us, and it's not for one of us to tell another one of us what it is. But Lady Breon, you have eloquently expressed it for us tonight, and to that, we are indebted. At this time, I'm going to ask the mayor to come forward and give us some remarks for the occasion tonight. The mayor's been busy. Please give a hand to Mayor Pugh.
Don't we have a great MC? Let's give Kai Jackson a big round of applause. So you all, I cannot miss this opportunity because we have the HUD secretary here, who all of you know is from Baltimore City. Let's give our HUD secretary a big round of applause. And let me just say this, and I whispered in his ear, that we are, Baltimore City, competed for we were one of 20 cities competing for Promised Neighborhoods. And now we're one of 6. And they're going to award 3. So we're very excited about that. And then I shared with him that because we knew opportunity zones were coming, because in January, when I was at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, Bakari, with our incoming president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, Steve Benjamin, I learned about opportunity zones. So I came back and I said to my team, do you all know about opportunity zones? And everybody looked at me, I said, get busy. And we just found out, because what you have to do is submit it to the governor, and the governor decides what jurisdictions get opportunity zones that are submitted to the federal government. And we submitted 44 neighborhoods because we were on top of it. And we learned first that the governor accepted 41 of our 44. And then we learned that he accepted 42 of our 44. That is significant, and I want to thank Janet Abrams. Is she here? Stand up, Janet. I stole Janet from New York. She is the president of the Housing Authority of Baltimore City. Y'all see that African-American woman? Stand up again. And here's what I need you all to know. Housing is important. Fair housing is important. Equity and equality in housing is important. And growing Baltimore City is important. And I also need you all to know that I am focused every single day on reducing violence in our city. Because people choose cities for two reasons: quality of housing and reduce crime. And I should say three, educational facilities. And I want you all to know we brought back $1 billion in my last year of the Senate. We are on target to build more schools in Baltimore than the entire state. 28 new schools, built 7 so far, and we're going to keep it moving. And for those of you, and I tell people, don't mistake meekness for weakness. When I walk the streets of our city, I am very sincere. I believe that every neighborhood deserves investment. There are people who live inside of neighborhoods that have been neglected for decades. I tell them trees don't grow through houses overnight. That's decades of neglect. So when I walk Pennsylvania Avenue or North Avenue and I say mini marts on those streets are filthy, and I'm not saying everyone, but I'm saying that our citizens deserve fresh fruits and vegetables. I don't need folks walking behind me telling me that they got cannolis on Pennsylvania Avenue because they don't have them on Pennsylvania Avenue. But again, let me just say this to you all. We are working to make this the greatest city in America. It can be. Today I spent my morning in the neighborhoods cleaning up. And I tell folks, trash don't get on the street by itself. While I'm walking through picking up trash in your neighborhood, I need you to understand that you have a responsibility to clean it up too. And finally, let me say to Sean Wright, our chairperson of MCCR, thank you for your work. Alvin, I've known you, it seems like forever. And you have been involved in this work for quite a long time. And I want to thank Monica Mitchell, the Vice President of Wells Fargo. Let's give them all a round of applause, you all. I want to remind you all that this is the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act. And Civil Rights Act of 1994, we were intended to follow so that we could make housing affordable. And I tell folks, we cannot be the city of just the poor, but we want to make sure that we make equality in housing and equity important. And I told 1,000 people today at the convention center, they were all there trying to get houses. Remember what my dad, I told them, I said, remember what my dad told me when I bought my first house. 3 times what you earn is what you can afford to buy. Include your taxes and your insurance in that as well. Don't get a house that you can't afford. Baltimore needs new residents, and we need you. Cities are changing, and what we do know is that people are coming back to cities. So we need you all to come back. 18 to 34, 55 years of age and older. The fastest growing populations in our city. Forbes magazine's got it right. They said millennials, we are in the top 10 cities for millennials to move to. So you all don't abandon the cities. We need you, and we know that with you, we will become the greatest city in America. And finally, to Mr. Bakari Sellers, who you all are going to hear from, I adore you. We love your commentating on CNN. Let's give him a big round of applause. I know you're going to have a great night. Have a wonderful evening. I've got 3 more stops I've got to make, but I could not stop by here without presenting my little proclamation. Isn't that cute? Got my little picture on there. proclamation to the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. Alvin, this is for you. I'm not going to read the whereas, wherefore, why to. All I'm going to say is that I am so grateful for all the work that you all do. Please continue to do the work on behalf of all of the citizens of the state of Maryland. You're an example of what civil rights and leadership is all about. Thank you. Thank you all. Have a great night. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Let me bring back Kai.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate that. And that is a well-deserved award for Alvin, a guy who's been a stalwart in this issue of fair housing and of civil rights. Many people like you behind the scenes in the thick of it, but the general public may not always know the hard work that you're doing, and I'm glad the mayor recognized you tonight, my friend. As we continue on, please continue to eat your dinner. Is your dinner good? Please thank Brother Jim Britton, right, Alvin?
Yep.
Jim Britton, wonderful caterer. Jim, thank you for all the work you've done and for a wonderful catering night. Please give your catering staff a hand tonight, ladies and gentlemen, your servers. They're working very hard. And I'm sure if there's a special dietary need that anyone has had, that they will do their best to accommodate you. This has been a wonderful evening, and it's been made possible with the help of our community partners and sponsors. Please join me right now in welcoming our champion sponsor, Wells Fargo Bank, represented by Monica Mitchell, Vice President of Community Relations and Corporate Responsibility. Monica.
Likewise, thank you. I'm short. Good evening, everybody. As Kai mentioned, my name is Monica Mitchell. It is my pleasure to be here tonight. As a native of Baltimore, it is my incredible pleasure to be able to oversee community development and philanthropy for Wells Fargo. I think it's incredibly important when making community development decisions that you have folks at the table who know the community, who understand the community, and recognize the players on the ground, the grassroots organizations on the ground that are making the difference. Wells Fargo joins the nation in recognizing the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act and joins Maryland in celebrating the 90th anniversary of the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. The Fair Housing Act is an important milestone in our country towards ensuring equal and fair housing for all Americans and prohibiting discriminatory practices. Now, while there's been great progress in fair housing over the past 50 years, there is more work to be done, and that's why I'm here tonight. Even with the Fair Housing Act in place, the industry, banks, realtors, government agencies, and housing organizations must work together. And each organization, including Wells Fargo, must hold itself accountable to being intolerant of any kind of discrimination in any aspect of a family's journey towards achieving the dream of homeownership, period. Within the last 2 years, in an effort to address the lowered homeownership rates among several prominent diverse segments, Wells Fargo publicly announced goals to help increase the number of new African American, Hispanic, and Native American homeowners in this country, with investments over $185 billion, along with internal goals to increase the diversity of the sales teams, because we know representation matters too, at every single level. And that is only the beginning. In recognition of the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act, we are proud to support projects, programs, and initiatives that are advancing the work in housing equity, including the exhibit that's on display tonight, Undesigned the Red Line. If you haven't taken an opportunity to explore the exhibit, I urge you to do so before the end of the evening, or visit the exhibit as it moves to the Motor House on North Avenue between May and July. Now, the reason that I'm so personally passionate about supporting this exhibit tonight and being here is because unless we're all honest about the roles that individuals and institutions played in creating housing and wealth inequalities, then we have to take that honesty and become intentional about building the systems that pursue equity so that we don't continue to see disparate impacts that may start at housing but then filter down to education, public safety, health, and economic development. The work of MCCR and the work that so many of you do helps to ensure that we continue moving in the right direction. So we are so proud to be with you tonight and celebrate and support organizations, community leaders, advocates, and yes, Lady Breon, even activists, in helping to support the impact that you make to ensure that homeownership is within the reach of diverse households and for families across the economic spectrum. Thank you.